Right, so today is our last lecture of the stylistic block proper, and we're going to look at text analysis, but from a slightly different point of view, on a slightly more sophisticated level than we did it last time, because last time we also spoke about the text, right? About the coherence of the text, about these connections and links and how the text works, what types of text there are, right? And today we're going to look more at the categories of analysis of text. So today we're doing the basics of literary criticism, of literary literary analysis of the text. And this is actually something that you will have to do a lot while you are in school as teachers. And it is based, my today's lecture is based, and I honestly confess this, the skeleton, the main structure of my today's lecture is built around the handout called Analyzing Literature, which you find in your seminar books. Well, the material, well, the information is there. And it comes from Peterson's AP Success English Language and Composition, which I find immensely helpful. I mean, the scheme of analysis is very helpful. But I'm going to look at all of these categories one by one. And we begin with analyzing. When we approach a text, we first need to assess what mode of discourse this is, whether it is a narrative, description, drama, or argument and persuasion. And I think you are familiar with all of these things, but what is a narrative? What is a narrative? Hmm? Yes, in Russian it is rendered as повествование, but what about the features of a narrative? What should a narrative contain? Где же вся остальная 207-я группа? Особенно те товарищи, которые очень хотели получить повыше оценки. Uh, no, I'm just leaving it here in case you have something to say. So what is a narrative? What are the typical features of a narrative? What makes a narrative a narrative? Can you speak in the microphone, please?
There is a narration if there is a narrator.
Well, but if we just read a text which is in the third person singular, how do we know that there is a narrator? What makes a narrative different from a description?
There are a lot of verbs, if I'm not mistaken, and there are a lot of adjectives in the description.
Yes, but what is the essential difference? Not the markers. Yeah, you're quite right. A narrative would contain words, verbs, and a description would contain adjectives. But what makes them essentially different?
Opinions.
There are no opinions in narrative or description. Well, in the description there may be evaluative opinions, but
the plot, maybe.
Of course, a narrative contains a sequence of events. A narrative contains a sequence of events. That's a narrative. So somebody must do something, right? And then this is a narrative. That's why we have verbs. And a description is a static description, right? It's a static description of something. And that's why we have adjectives. So we describe something statically in a narrative and dynamically if it is a narrative. What is a drama? And what makes it different from a narrative or a description? Don't be afraid to speak out. Go on. Hmm? Well, okay. Let me formulate it myself. Drama is dialogue. Any dialogue that you encounter in fiction or in any other text, this is drama. Primarily, first and foremost, drama exists in the forms of plays, right? Dramas themselves. That can be tragedies, comedies. Their genre is secondary. And drama is the umbrella term which encompasses them all and means that they are all based on exchanges, verbal exchanges between characters, right? It is not about it is a term which is not about the outcome of this play, right? It's not whether if the person dies, that's tragedy. If he doesn't die, that's drama, right? That's another understanding of the term. That's just another use of the term. But in this sense, as mode of discourse, drama is any exchange of words. And finally, argument or persuasion. What makes it different from narrative description and drama? Hmm? Any ideas? What makes a persuasion or an argument different from the first three?
A monologue.
Well, first of all, it's a monologue, right? You are. And secondly, well, what does persuasion imply? It implies that the author wants the reader or the listener to adopt, consider, and finally adopt his or her point of view. And that means that he gives reasons, right? So an argument of persuasion usually contains a problem and the ways to go about it, what to do about this problem. And usually there is this first, second, third, there is advice, there is recommendation, there is some background. So it's a problem and what is around the problem, right? Now let's have a look. I decided to give you examples of all these modes of discourse, types of modes of discourse, from Three Men in a Boat. Well, what is this? There were four of us: George and William, Samuel Harris, and myself and Montmorency, who were sitting in my room smoking and talking about how bad we were. Bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. What is this? Narrative description, persuasion, or drama? Huh? That's a narrative. Right, you are. Right, you are. This is the description of the situation in the dynamic form. What they were doing, what they were talking about, right? What happened next? What happened first, second, and next? Hi, come further in, I said, shaking him by the shoulder. You'll be overboard. Oh my, I wish I was the only answer I could get, and there I had to leave him. That's a piece of what? Say it louder. Can't hear. Drama, of course. Why afraid? This is a piece of drama, right? Although it comes from the same book, right? Narration, drama. It is lumber, man. All lumber, хлам. Throw it overboard. Makes the boat so heavy to pull. You nearly faint at the oars, весла. It makes it so cumbersome and dangerous to manage. Throw the lumber over, man. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need, a homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends, worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you. Hmm? What is this? Eh? Persuasion, right you are. where he persuades people to not get attached to old things, right? To old impressions. And we see here from how do we know that this is persuasion? There are imperative verbs, right? Imperative verbs. And finally, from Picnic Point to Old Windsor Lock is a delightful bit of the river. A shady road dotted here and there with dainty little cottages runs by the bank up to the bells of Ousley, a picturesque inn, as most upriver inns are, and a place where a very good glass of ale may be drunk, so Harris says. And on a matter of this kind, you can take Harris's word. What is this, finally? A description. This is a static description of something. So I hope that now this distinction between narrative, description, drama, and argument and persuasion is clear. Now, the second point of analysis is a title when we continue to analyze a piece of fiction or prose. If there is a title, what does it tell you? What does it suggest about the subject or the theme meaning of the passage? And when we speak about the title, so the text sometimes doesn't have a title, right? But sometimes it does. What does it tell you? And what does it suggest about the subject or the passage? And actually, this is important for us as teachers because we teach students, and we must know it ourselves, how to predict the contents of the text by its title. Now, this is a very nice definition. I advise everyone to put it down right now. Not only to take a picture of it, but also to put it down to try and remember it. Title is a condensed text, сгущенный текст. That's a brilliant definition, don't you think? Title is a condensed text, and the first interpretation offered by the author himself. And before we interpret the text itself, the author has already interpreted it for us, giving us some main thing. And what can the title reflect? The title usually reflects the main conflict. For example, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. It already gives us the main conflict of the story between pride of Darcy and prejudice of Elizabeth. Main hero or object, for example, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is the main hero. The setting, 1984 by George Orwell. It gives us the setting. When does the event take place? In 1984. Do you know the story that he actually changed the last digits of the year when he wrote the text and got future? He wrote it in 1948. He changed the last two digits and got the name for his novel. Message: A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And this tells us pretty much all about what this book is about, right? That's about people who are at war and who want to get peace and things like that, right? Farewell to Arms. And last time we discussed that it's an allusion to the book of prophet Isaiah. Any of these can be a symbol. We're going to speak about symbols slightly more, but any of these, the conflict, the hero, the setting, or the message can be a symbol. For example, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. The Glass Menagerie, Стеклянный зверинец. This is about a small girl whose only treasure was a zoo of small glass figures of animals. And she treasured it very much. And I think she had some problems with her mental development or something. And then finally, so this, in a way, this is a symbol of her soul, which is as fragile as that glass menagerie. And finally, there is an accident and it is broken. It's broken, this glass zoo. And of course, this is a symbol of her soul being broken and wounded by people's coarseness and rudeness. Right, any questions about the title? No. Right, themes and message. What is the theme or central idea? What other themes are brought up? What motives are dominant? How is the theme conveyed? And what symbols are used? these are the questions that you have already read. But now let's discuss what are these things. So, what are themes? Themes are the fundamental and often universal ideas explored in a literary work. So it's just in like in your final year projects, in your what we call diploma, right? When you have предмет объект. So this is roughly the object of what you write about. But actually, there may be many themes exploited in a story. For example, in Tribute by Copper that we analyzed with you, various themes are raised. One of them, well, the central one, is the social inequality and injustice. But there are also supportive themes of patriotism, true and false, of uh, hypocrisy, right, of human relationships and choosing between what is material and what is immaterial, steadiness, well, and war, one more theme, right? So the universal idea is explored in literary work. Motives are recurrent structures, recurrent or recurring, возобновляющиеся, повторяющиеся structures, contrasts, or literary devices that can help to develop the text's major themes. Sometimes the terms motifs and themes are used interchangeably, but in a way, the term motive is supportive. It's a contributory term, additional term to the term of theme. And motive is also something which is borrowed from the world of of visual arts, right? For example, if we are choosing some wallpaper, we can choose a wallpaper with floral motifs, right? That means that there will be some flowers or plants which recur everywhere. Or, for example, animal motifs. And you see the examples here, right? These are things which repeat in many places. The same things appear in architecture as well, when you can choose some motif, like the Japanese motifs, in decorating the interior. And the same thing happens, appears in literary works. And one more topic, which I decided to introduce you for you to know, because it appears in different works. In a way, it is synonymous to the word motive, and this is the leitmotif. Leitmotif, a recurring melody that is initially. This is a recurring melody that is played along with the character or allusion to a theme whenever one or the other appeared on stage. In literary studies, that's a recurring theme. For example, well, but usually leitmotifs are a broader thing than just a motive, right? We'll see now, I'll give you some examples, but motive can be the motive of jealousy, right, which appears somewhere, or the motive of food. And leitmotif is something broader. Usually, it's, for example, in American literature studies. I think you were given several leitmotifs of American literature, and one of them is honesty, integrity, right? Another one is predestination, предназначенность, and this comes from the Protestant background, and the leitmotif of unsinfulness, right? Now, things like that. And what do we see instantiated shown in this particular piece? That's an example of how the word leitmotif is used. That's from Merriam-Webster. She ends up waiting tables, and that, along with the dishwashing, establishes the book's main leitmotif. Time and again, she's pulled really back to the world of food and hospitality, right? So the world of food and hospitality is the leitmotif of some book, where the main heroine is shown as waiting tables and dishwashing, right? Is it clear? Right, now let's practice. This is a famous poem by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. from what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. This is a terribly elegant, sorry for this pun, intentional pun, oxymoron. This is a terribly nice poem, very interesting. And now, but what is the main theme and what is the main message? What is the main theme? Human relationships. Ice, I'm sorry, hate and desire. This is the theme. What is the main message? Now, I've prepared a multiple choice for you to make it easier for you, because I understand this is a lecture. So look at these, look at this list of messages, and you will have to choose one of them, which is the most appropriate one. Desire is a hot and inflammable passion that works in us like fire. Fire is the symbol of desire. Ice is the symbol of hate. Desire and hate, like fire and ice, are almost equally destructive forces. The world will perish because of desire and hate among people. Don't you think it resembles a bit YG, right? And multiple choice in reading. So in a way, there is the topic of pedagogy and the methodology of teaching languages here as well. So you see how useful it can be, these distinctions of literary analysis. So which message do you think comes closest to the poem itself? Once again, this is the poem. Some say the world will end in fire, some say nice. From what I've tasted of desire, hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. So what is the message? Well, why is number one not the message? It's incomplete. It's only about desire. What about number two? Fire is a symbol of desire. Ice is the symbol of hate. Is it true? Why is it incomplete? Can you speak in the mic, please?
There is only the symbol, and there are no consequences like of fire and of ice.
That's right. That's right. Desire and hate, like fire and ice, are almost equally destructive forces.
This seems to be true.
This seems to be true. This is the message of this poem. Why is the fourth one not appropriate? The world will perish because of desire and hate among people. Why is it not true? I mean, why is it not the message of the poem? Well, he never says that the world will do it, right? He doesn't make prophecies. He doesn't say that the world will perish. He just uses the image of apocalypse to show how destructive how destructive hate and desire can be. See? So this is a supportive thing, not the main message. So you see, identifying the message of something, of course, can sometimes be tricky, but it is very important to be able to do it, and we can do it with the help of analysis, right? What we just did, we analyzed it mentally, very quickly, did our stylistic analysis, and then interpreted the text. Now, symbols are objects, characters, figures, or colors used to represent abstract ideas or concepts. Characters, objects, figures, or colors used to represent abstract ideas or concepts. Now, let's have a look at how it works. I don't know whether you read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. But generally, the book is a dystopian book about some distant future when the world is ruled by totalitarian forces who are destroying books because they want to destroy knowledge. They prevent people from communicating, from walking in the street, rather than driving a car, right? And there is a special cohort, a special department of people who are firemen, but whose job is to burn books, to burn things rather than extinguish fires. And the main character, Montag, is one of those people. And well, there are several themes explored here. One of them is knowledge, the importance of knowledge, and the connection between freedom and knowledge. But what is what is the recurring motive? The recurring motive is the motive of fire. Remember wallpaper with floral design. So here we have this motive which runs throughout the whole text, is the motive of fire. And it appears in many things. It appears as a patch of a salamander on the uniform of those firemen. Why salamandra? According to ancient views, what happened to Salamandra? She lived in fire and did not burn. And of course, this is a symbol, right? This is a symbol of true knowledge, which does not perish in fire, right? And that's the image of the main character himself, who went through this totalitarian fire, but he emerged victorious, and he understood the true meaning of knowledge. So in a way, he survived this fire of destruction. And the first part of the book is called The Hearth and the Salamander. What is the hearth? Achak. That's the place and home which contains fire. So that's a different hypostasis, a different face of fire, as something warming, something which is not destructive, but it is life preserving, right? And then we, in the story, we also encounter the problem of family life, that family is endangered in this distant future. And so these are the motives, right, which recur throughout the story. And of course, the picture that you show here is represents one of the scenes when an old woman chooses to burn together with her books rather than go out and leave them. And in a way, she also becomes, well, Salamander becomes her symbol as well, because she dies, but her soul doesn't die, right? So there is this deep paradoxical meaning. So we see how these themes and motives and leitmotifs, they are all intertwined in this interesting book. Now, the third point is setting. In Russian, it is also rendered as setting nowadays in literature studies, and it can be very important. And we saw that from analyzing the story Tribute by Coppard, right, where Bradel was an important setting for the story. It may be typical or vice versa, it may be unique. Where and when? So we have to ask ourselves the questions. Where and when does the selection take place? What details does the writer use to create the setting? Does the setting create a mood or a feeling? And a mood is actually one more term of literary analysis, which I am not devoting a special chapter to, right? I just highlighted it for you to remember and maybe tick it somewhere. This is one more term of literary analysis. The mood is one of the categories that we have to analyze, how it is created. And very often it is the setting which creates the mood. Is the setting a symbol for an important idea the writer wants to convey? So the setting can be a symbol as well. Does the setting play a role in the central conflict? Well, and of course, we just saw from Ray Bradbury that the setting in this distant future may play an important role in the central conflict because it can create the conflict itself. Now, let's have a look at how it all works. Well, a very vivid example of how the setting creates a mood is Wuthering Heights by Bronte. Wuthering Heights is set in the bleak, desolate, rocky Yorkshire moors. So the plains, which are overgrown with heath, heather with the heather plants, and at the same time being wild and windy and inhospitable. At the same time, they possess a magnetic attraction. So people love it for the feeling of freedom, for the feeling of openness. So it's a paradoxical mixture of danger and this magnetic attraction. And well, first of all, it sets the mood, right? And we see that this place, Wuthering Heights, which is a farm on a hillside, it is owned by a man with a very difficult character, who is like those moors, who is wild, uncontrollable, but at the same time, he's loved by other characters. But at the same, well, he's not a very good man, though. And there is another farm which is opposite. There's an antithesis between Wuthering Heights and another cottage where his counterparts live. And that one is sunny, pleasant, and so is the family. So, in a way, the setting creates the mood, but it's also a separate, we can say that this is a separate character. It plays a separate role in the conflict, right? Uh, well, one more example would be if you remember Three Sisters by Anton Chekhov. And they always keep saying, we want to go to Moscow, 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 which never appears. But it all, well, several times it appears in what they say. And Moscow starts to play a role of a paradise, a role of some faraway land, fairy-like land, which attracts people, right? Where everything is much better than in real life. And yeah, so this is a picture of moors, and you can see that this creates a mood, doesn't it? These rocky outcrops, these rocky stones, rocky cliffs. So they are wild, desolate, bleak, but at the same time magnetically attractive. Now, when we analyze the setting, there is a nice distinction that we can bear in mind, and this is a distinction between time and space setting. So the setting contains time and space. So we have to understand when and where this selection takes place. And there is also a slight distinction between the global setting and the local setting. So where does it take place? In which country? In which age? And local setting is which particular place? Is it inside the house, or is it in the garden, or in the streets? So there are two nice examples of opposites in terms of setting. Woe from Wit, Горе от ума by Griboyedov. To remember, well, let's define the time-space setting and global and local setting. Time, globally, which century does it take place in? The 19th century. And locally, how much time does this play cover? Either 3 days or even one day, something like that. I think it is within one day. And that's important, right? That's important. And spatial setting, globally, it happens on planet Earth, in the solar system, and in Russia of the 19th century. And locally, where does it happen? Well, from where? In St. Petersburg, and in one particular house. All this play is within Famuzov's house, right? Only inside the house. So no other setting. Now, if we think about David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, this would be a very different example. Well, again, globally, it happens where? England, which century? 19th century, right? End of the 19th century. And, well, middle of the 19th century. And how much time does it encompass? How many days? David Copperfield. A whole life. That's a whole life of one person. So that is several decades. And places, a variety of places, right? From London to some other cities and townlets, right? So there are lots and lots of settings. So you see that works can have this range of setting in terms of time and place. Also, what we have to look out for and what we have to teach our students to look out for are period markers. What are period markers? Who knows? Can you speak in the microphone?
Peculiarities of the time of the setting.
So some objects, or maybe some attitudes of people, or maybe some news which is described in the story, which give us a hint of what is happening. And very often it is the objects, right? Clothes, some artifacts, well, household things. And what is local color? Local color. In Russian, it is rendered as местный колорит. And it is rendered by phrases in some language, right? They may be barbarisms. And again, they may be objects. Do you remember from Goldsworthy that we read, to let? There were sombreros, cactuses, tumbling bells. So things like that, which give us this local color or the period markers, right? So they describe the setting from the point of view of space and time. Now, the following 3 slides will be the beginning of the story Cat in the Rain by Hemingway, a very nice story, which I like very much. But we're going to look at this beginning from the point of view of the setting. There were only 2 Americans stopping at the hotel. They did not know any of the people. They passed on the stairs on their way to and from their room. Their room was on the second floor facing the sea. It also faced the public garden and the war monument. There were big palms and green benches in the public garden. In the good weather, there was always an artist with his easel. Artists liked the way the palms grew and the bright colors of the hotels facing the gardens and the sea. Italians came from a long way off to look at the war monument. It was made of bronze and glistened in the rain. First of all, what elements of the setting do we see? As you remember, Hemingway's style is very dry and succinct, but at the same time, it does contain this local color and period markers. Well, Americans, right? We immediately get it that Americans, and where are they? Italians came. They're in Italy. So Americans as tourists. So the setting is the hotel, which is facing the sea. Then of the setting, he describes some more things, public garden and the war monument, which then repeats. And when he says the war monument, this is a period marker. What kind of war could that be? When did people start to erect monuments to wars? Well, already in the 19th century, but the war monument refers to which particular war? To the First World War, right? And this places it in the time setting after the war. And also some elements of the setting which create, well, the images in our mind. The only color that he uses here is green. The palms are green and the green benches. Then there will be a green table under which the cat will be. So it's green, but it's also gray because of rain. And the setting is then created by this well, feeling of rain, right? It glistened in the rain, the war monument. It was raining. The rain dripped from the palm trees. Water stood in pools on the gravel paths. The sea broke in a long line in the rain and slipped back down the beach to come up and break up again in a long line in the rain. The motor cars were gone from the square by the war monument. Across the square, in the doorway of the cafe, a waiter stood looking out at the empty square. So again, he repeats this monotony of the sea tide. Break again in a long line in the rain, broke in a long line in the rain. The rain, it was raining. The rain dripped. Water stood in pools. In the rain, in the rain. So he, throughout this very short passage, he repeats the word rain 4 times. And that, of course, creates the picture of this gray day with rain, uncomfortable, uncozy atmosphere. And then he repeats the square, 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 square. And it, well, embeds this image of square into our minds. And finally, the American wife stood at the window looking out. The wife went downstairs, and the hotel owner stood up and bowed to her as she passed the office. His desk was at the far end of the office. He was an old man, very tall. Il piove, the wife said. She liked the hotel keeper. Si, si, signora, brutto tempo. It's very bad weather. Right? And these phrases in Italian, they add this local color. We feel as if we are in Italy because we hear this Italian speech. And that is, of course, much better than if we just hear the English when he describes. So we're done with the setting. Do you have any questions about the setting? No, as usual. Point of view. Then next we analyze from whose point of view the story is narrated. Is the passage told from the first person or from the third person point of view? Is the narrator limited or omniscient? Limited, ограниченный, omniscient, всезнающий. And what is the effect of the chosen point of view? Now, let's have a look at these examples. My father had a small estate in Nottinghamshire. I was the third of 5 sons. He sent me to Emmanuel College in Cambridge at 14 years old, where I resided 3 years and applied myself close to my studies. This is, of course, a first-person narration, and usually first-person narration makes the narrator limited because it is narrated from inside the story, and that shows very often it is marked by the phrase, I don't know what happened next, or I don't know what they thought. So the narrator admits himself or herself that they don't know certain things, which makes them limited. And of course, that produces an effect on the story because it makes it feel as if it is a real human being. We are all limited, right? We don't know many things. And of course, this adds some veracity to the story, some wish to trust this person. But it also makes it more characteristic. When it is a third person narration, it's not as vivid as when it is a first person narration. Sometimes it is not, well, it is not felt so much that this is the first person narration, but the author, sometimes the narrator addresses the reader. And that also adds a bit of intimacy into the style. About the time, you must know, the country embarked upon a disastrous campaign, a war so calamitous that every sacrifice was demanded of battle. And as soon as, that is from Coppet, right? Tribute. As soon as we add you, we automatically add I. And this is an important thing to remember. As soon as you add second person pronoun, automatically the first person pronoun appears mentally, right? Implicitly. Well, and of course, the third person point of view is again from Ray Bradbury. Montag grinned, the feast grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never, ever went away as long as he remembered. And these phrases marked green. He knew that later going to sleep he would feel. These are the things which no third person would know except Montag himself. So in this passage, the narrator, the author, shows that he is omniscient. He knows everything. What Montag felt, what he would dream about, all these things which are normally not known by third persons. Now, the fifth point is central conflict. And this is one more question that we have to ask ourselves. In what struggle is the protagonist involved? Is the central conflict internal within the main character's mind, or external with another character, society, or nature? How is the conflict resolved? Is it resolved or not? And so the first question is it internal or external? And if it is external, then is it a conflict with another character? Is it a conflict between an individual and society? Or is it a conflict between an individual and nature? So let's think about these works in terms of conflict. Lady Windermere's Fan. Have you read this play by Oscar Wilde? Have you seen it? Well, I advise, by the way, all of you to read it one day. This is a classic. And well, the central conflict is, well, very shortly, the plot is that there is a lady who is very virtuous and who is so good. But then Lord Darlington leaves she leaves her fan at another person's home. And that creates this collision that it appears that she was at his home, that looks like his lover. So there is this conflict between her and her own conscience, whether she should go on with this lover, run away, or not. And this is a conflict with her moral feeling, right? And at the same time, of course, there is the conflict. This is the main conflict. There are some other conflicts, but this is the main one. 1984. That's a conflict between who and who? Can you speak in the mic, please?
Between one man, one person, and the whole society, the government.
Society and the government, right? You are. So this is one man and the society. The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway.
I guess that's the metaphor that a man struggles with himself and the life.
So it's an internal conflict,
Yeah.
but of course, it is all shown through the conflict between
he and the big fish, the shark, or
yeah. So it's between a human being and nature.
Yeah.
Right. A very frequent conflict between a human and nature. The hostile elements. You know this meaning of the word elements, stichia, right? So the struggle between man and some element. Hamlet. What is the conflict? Mike.
Between Hamlet and his mind.
On the one hand, yes, so it's an internal conflict, but of course there are some other important conflicts. Who is his main antagonist? Yes, his uncle, his stepfather, right? Right, his stepfather. And who wants to kill him, right? Because Hamlet is the rightful heir to the throne. So this is a conflict with another character between protagonist and antagonist. Then we said this is internal conflict, but also this is a conflict between Hamlet and everybody else in the story, except for a few friends. He's in conflict with the society of those people who surround his mother and his stepfather. And finally, The Painted Veil by Somerset Maugham. Did you read it? So what is it the conflict of
Uh,
whose conflict is it?
may I answer to that question? So, as far as I remember, the main conflict of the story is the inner conflict on the
Hmm?
Kitty, the main heroine, the main
That's
protagonist,
a
the main.
conflict
Yeah.
between, well, the main conflict is between the husband and the wife, right? Between Walter and what was her name?
Kitty,
Kitty, Kitty and Walter.
as I remember.
So between two characters, protagonist and antagonist. In this case, it's very difficult to say who the antagonist is and who is the protagonist, right? Because both, in this case, it is not evident, not obvious. But it's also one more conflict between Kitty, old Kitty, and the new
And the new
Kitty,
one.
right? Well, that's a conflict inside her mind between what is good and what is bad, right? She has to grow through this conflict. Now, the sixth point that we have to ask ourselves is what events take place in the selection. And we speak here of the development, or another term which I found and which I find quite useful is the story arc. The story arc, arca story, so how it develops. And here, well, you will get from me two sets of terms. They're similar but slightly different. So this one implies that any story would have five elements of the story arc: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And this is something which I borrowed from the BBC website, and I also borrowed some examples about Cinderella, how to analyze Cinderella in terms of this development. Exposition. Cinderella's mother has died, and the stepmother moves in with her two daughters. So that's what prepares us for action. Rising action. The ugly sisters make Cinderella do the housework and don't invite her to the ball. So that's how it rises. Climax. With a little help from her fairy godmother, Cinderella makes it to the palace ball and dances with the prince. I think that it is called the climax because this is the brightest point, right? What creates everything, all the effect. The falling action. The prince finds Cinderella's glass slipper and travels the country to find her. And finally, the resolution. Despite the efforts of the ugly sisters, the prince finds Cinderella, they get married and live happily ever after. Right? So this is how you can analyze stories together with your children, right? I mean, with your students. Sometimes it is necessary to show them what the top point is, how it all develops, and to structure. The main thing is not even that you're not going to explain the story arc to them. It's important to be able to structure the story in your mind and then to translate the knowledge how to structure stories to your students. That's another set of terms about the same thing. What events correspond to these stages of a story? Introduction or exposition, complication, завязка. And there may be several complications. One, two, especially, well, in long stories. Then comes climax and denouement. That's, I gave you the pronunciation. This is the French word. Denouement, that's развязка, right? What follows. And, we can analyze Romeo and Juliet according to these terms. So what is the introduction exposition? When they meet each other, right? Or rather, there is this story about the feud between Montecchi and Capuletti. And then complication one is when they meet. Romeo sees Juliet, he's in love with her, and the problem is that they can't be married because they belong to different clans. There is another complication about Juliet's brother, right? Juliet's relatives, when they fight and kill each other, and about the friends. Then climax is when Juliet, when they try to imitate Julia's death, but it all goes amiss, goes wrong, and Romeo kills himself, and then Juliet also kills herself. And the denouement is the story of reconciliation of the two clans whose fate is decided by this sad story. Some special plot devices that we can find. So in the development, is the narrative linear or non-linear? This is an important question because the narration can be non-linear. And when the narration is non-linear, very often there are some special plot devices, such as foreshadowing, предвосхищение, flashbacks, you know this, plot twists, a story within a story, рассказ внутри рассказа, and a surprise ending. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which a writer gives an advance hint of what is to come later in the story. And an object that foreshadows something that comes later in the story is called Chekhov's gun. That's a literary term, Chekhov's gun. It comes from Chekhov's words when he explained how to write stories. He said, if in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there. Right? So all the objects must be important. Well, for example, O thou Mowgli, for Mowgli the frog I will call thee. The time will come when thou wilt hunt Shere Han, as he has hunted thee. These are the words by Mother Wolf when they adopt Mowgli into their family of wolves. And she says these things to Mowgli. Time will come when thou wilt hunt Shere Han, as he has hunted thee. And that happens at the beginning of the story. But Mother Wolf already foreshadows that it will all result with the conflict between Shere Han and Mowgli. He had no idea of the disastrous chain of events to follow. Он и не знал, какая за этим последует печальная цепь событий. That foreshadows what is going to happen next because it tells us of the disastrous events, that we have to expect some disastrous events. There is one more type of foreshadowing, which is called a red herring, красная селедка. A hint that is designed to mislead the audience is referred to as a red herring. This is also foreshadowing, but it has to send you the wrong way. It is creates a plot twist, right? For example, in The Hound of Baskervilles, like in any detective stories, there are two characters who we think might be the criminals. One of them is Barrymore, who is the butler at the manor, and he looks suspicious because he goes up to the attic, he goes alone to the moors, he brings something, and he doesn't look nice. That's Barrymore in the picture. But then it turns out that he's not the main criminal. He is just helping his sister's brother, who was a convict, a runaway convict. And Stapleton, who at first looks quite decent, a botanist and a scientist, he turns out to be the real villain. So Barrymore is the red herring. A flashback is an interruption of the chronological sequence as of a film or literary work by an event of earlier occurrence. And this shows us this nonlinear events. So again, from Three Men in a Boat. Do you remember when at the beginning there are lots of flashbacks in Three Men in a Boat, lots of stories within a story. One of them is about the British Museum when he started to read an encyclopedia about diseases and found all of these diseases in himself. Right, so I remember going to the British Museum. Usually, such words as "I remember," "he remembered," that they introduce flashbacks. A story within a story, and some other terms that you might encounter: a frame story, a matryoshka story, nested stories. Well, there are lots of them, starting with 1001 Nights, when there is a frame story, and then she tells a lot of fairy tales. The Canterbury Tales. Also, there is a frame story of them going to Canterbury, and then each one of them tells their own story. Frankenstein, it's deeply embedded narrative where there are several stories within each other. It's like Matryoshka story. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. There are also separate stories of the Hatter. Then there is a story of Humpty Dumpty. the story of Mock Turtle and Griffin. The Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov is a famous separate story, which sometimes is even published separately, right? История Великого Инквизитора. Also, I listed several interesting literary techniques which concern the plot, which I think you might find interesting. They are a magic object or an object quest. A lot of stories are built around some quest after an object. Even The Lord of the Rings, the whole story is built around this object quest, and when you have to do something with the object, right? A love triangle, that's one more subplot. A cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is when you finish the chapter or part of the book with some unexpected thing and which you don't know what the consequence will be. So you're kept in suspense, and this is called a cliffhanger. And a narrative hook is used not only in fiction, it can also be used very frequently. It is used in newspaper articles when the author starts with an interesting fact, and that hooks your attention and you start to read what goes next, which might be not so interesting. Characterization. Who is the protagonist, antagonist? Well, you know this, right? The main character who is good, he is protagonist. Antagonist is his counterpart. Who is the author's mouthpiece? And this is also sometimes important because sometimes it's not the protagonist who expresses the author's views, right? It may be some secondary character. Very often the character sympathizes with the protagonist, but he criticizes him or her. He shows his tragedy. And it is somebody else who tells us about the author's ideas. In classical plays, there it is called резонер, right? Somebody who tells us the wisdom of the author. Who are the major, minor characters? And also one more very important question. Which characters change and which are flat, right? Плоские персонажи, flat. The ones which are like flat pictures, they are not interesting. They do not have several sides. They are just there to perform some emploi, some role. Well, if you remember Pride and Prejudice, then of course the major characters are Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy and Jane Bennet. They are the main characters. All the other characters are minor characters, like Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, George Wickham, Lydia Bennet, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and Mr. Williams. Who is the main, well, the protagonists, of course, are Elizabeth and Darcy. And who is the main antagonist? Wickham, he's one of the antagonists, but he's not the main antagonist. The main enemy is, she's in the picture, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, right? She's the evil force that sort of haunts them everywhere. And well, Mr. Collins is her assistant, right? Assistant antagonist. Well, and if we think about the classical not flat characters, rounded characters, this is Dorian Gray. And we even visually see how he changes, right? Because he changes throughout the story from a very sweet young man to a villain, right? And the paradox, the conflict is that he doesn't change his appearance. It is reflected in his picture. Finally, the tone. Does the author express his attitude to the events and characters? Sometimes he doesn't, but very often he does. Which words does he choose to set the tone? And actually, this part is not in that scheme that you have in the seminar books from Peterson, right? Which words does he choose to set the tone? Does he sound ironic or sarcastic? Accusatory, обвиняющий, apathetic, critical. What is apathetic? Indifferent, no emotions. Matter of fact, dry. Critical, nostalgic, serious, facetious, шутливый, right? Facetious tone, humorous, educational, when we feel that the author is trying to educate us, to tell us what is good or what's bad. Contemplative, размышляющий, right? Задумчивый. So there are many other things, and you can get more from this link. And well, these are examples from another link. Just these are just phrases which show us the tone. Cheerful. I can't wait to get to the party. Pessimistic. This party is going to be a disaster. Hopeful. This party could change everything for me. Optimistic. We're going to have a great time and absolutely nothing will go wrong. Melancholy. I remember the parties in my younger days. Things were simpler then. Arrogant. I hope they realize how lucky they are to have me on their guest list. Reverential. Being included tonight is an incredible honor. Fearful. But what if I make a fool of myself and nobody likes me? Humorous. It's not a party, it's a poolside bacchanal. Impersonal. It's just something to do, I guess. Desperate. I need to make this party count. Persuasive. Don't worry, a fun night out is exactly what you need. Inspirational. Sometimes all it takes is one magical night to turn your life around. So all of these things tell us the tone. And here on this link, you can find a story about a puppy with different other tones. And actually, this is one more very important thing to be able to teach your students, to feel the tone. Because even in Yege, some tasks are not about the factual meaning. They're rather about the tone and the attitude of the author. And we have to get it from the words. And so this is an additional resource that you can use about English literature and about literary analysis of certain stories, and you can use that for your teaching. And that's all. Thank you very much. And this concludes my course of lectures. Thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you will be able not only to use it. It's not about, stylistics is not really only about utilitarian things. It's about beauty, being able to appreciate beauty, and teaching to appreciate beauty. Do you know that in some Japanese schools, they have classes of appreciating beauty when they go out into the Japanese garden, and the teacher teaches students how to see beauty. I think we desperately lack this in our courses of studies, both at university and at school. And this is something that my course, I hope, this is something that my course, I think, tried to make up for, to compensate for. So this is about beauty. Second thing, this is about clarity and persuasion. Being able to analyze texts and interpret them develops the logical skills, develops our ability to analyze things. And what is teaching language about? It's about understanding. It's about communication. So it's being able to speak clearly and understand clearly. And thirdly, it's about the correctness. Unless we teach students how to use words appropriately to their stylistic coloring, we will not be able to teach them the meaning of this word, because the meaning is not only the connotations and denotations, it's also the context. And the context is provided by stylistics. And finally, last but not least, and this is the last idea that you will hear in my previous lecture, if you listen to this, about the pedagogical uses of stylistic knowledge. Actually, it's more than that. If we study how to analyze texts, it helps us to analyze the world. Because the world, some scholars say, and I agree with that, the world is a text. Moreover, the world is an intertext. Do you remember intertextuality? It's a whole web of texts connected together, made up of people, objects, situations, events. And if we approach the world as a text, that's a good metaphor for us to develop our own worldview correctly and to help our students to develop their personalities, their opinions, right? And to see that what we read, what we hear, has a context, it has the previous precedent text, and it is very important for us to be able to appreciate the full context and nuances of what is happening in this world. So this is really about life skills. It's not only about some stylistic devices and expressive means, although that is important as well. So thank you very much, and that concludes my lecture. Все, можно выключать. Спасибо.